Okay, the eye. ये आंखों की ही गुस्ताखियां होती हैं, तो इसलिए for that purpose we are going to study about the eye so that we can understand these type of uh, bad habits of the eye in detail. So first of all, the eye has a very special type of importance in some of the receptors in our body. Actually, you can easily guess that we have types of senses in our body. So one of those most important sense is the vision. But to be precise, sorry, to be very precise, we do know that to sense something we need the receptors. So we can we possess the receptors. We can possess the receptors in many forms. For example, sometimes we possess the receptor in the form of a complete organ. You can say a complete organ is dedicated as a receptor. I would give you example about these receptors, but let me give you an introductory. Let me provide you some introductory lines about the senses and receptors, so we can study it in more detail. Senses are in the form of receptors, and receptors can be in many forms in our body. For example, a complete organ, a multifunctional organ. For example, there can be an organ that works as a receptor as well as it has some other function. So we do have the example of this kind of receptors in our body as well. And on the third level, we do have cells as receptors. And many cells, only cells, not an organ, you can differentiate in all these three categories. There are some organs which are completely dedicated as receptors. Some organs have other functions, but they also act as receptors, and some are only cells that act as receptors. So I am going to provide you separate examples of all these three type of things so that we can understand what is the difference between a complete organ as a receptor and some and the other two categories. So let's have an example of cell as a receptor. Sometime we only need a single neuron to receive a stimulus. For example, pain receptor. We were studying about the pain reception yesterday, especially the reflex section. And when we were discussing, I was looking at your at the book, and the thing that I am telling you now is mentioned here, that we have sensory receptor nerve endings. There is no special organ for reception of pain. There is only a single neuron that can detect the pain. So it means a single neuron lies under the category of only a single cell. So the neuron as a cell is receiving the pain stimulus. So it would be categorized under cell as a receptor. Sometimes some organs act as multifunctional organs. For example, tongue. Tongue is an organ that can that has the taste buds as receptors, but it also has a function of rolling the food inside your mouth. You cannot move your food inside your mouth without the help of tongue. So it is a multifunctional organ. It has the function of reception, but it also has some other functions. So we can now distinguish between these type of categories. One, only one cell, actually it is third, only one cell is acting as a receptor, which I gave you example of pain. And second, an organ which is a very good receptor but also has some other functions. Similarly, you can mention the nose here. Nose also has some other functions, but there are some organs, and I think there is only a single organ that acts completely as a receptor. The focus of the organ, the focus of this particular organ is only about receiving of light and nothing else. Receiving of light and telling the brain that light is reaching the eye. So what I am trying to say, that according to my own opinion, there is only one organ that purely works as a receptor and it has no other function, and that particular organ is the eye. Because if we try to mention ear here, then ear does not only control the voice perception, it also maintains the balance of the body, which is very particular. Between both ears, there are two organs which are known as cochlea. I would discuss it in detail some other time if you need it. But this structure is present inside the ear. So ear also would be lying under the category of multifunctional organ. But according to my own perception, there is only one organ that in which all the structures are dedicated to receive the light. All the structures are dedicated to receive the light, and that is eye. So we are now going to discuss that what is the structure of eye, and how am I saying that it is receiving a stimulus. All of the structures are dedicated to receive the stimulus. How am I saying this? Let's have a look on the structure of the eye. There is a very detailed structure present in your book, but for understanding of labeling, it takes me much time to draw the diagram here, especially. But the problem is to understand the labelings separately each and every time. We need to we need to draw the diagram so we can separately label everything. So that is why I draw the diagram here, without you can say that without any uh, diagram. Without taking the time into account, I prefer to draw the diagram so that we can easily guess the identifications of different parts of the diagram. You know, it took much of our time to draw this diagram, and this one also. It took almost 3 minutes, and then also this one, and especially the heart. But when we were talking about the heart, it took much time. Definitely, this diagram also took much time. But what exactly happens that we now know each and every labeling of that particular diagram. That is why I'm saying this. So eye, if we talk about the eye, it is basically composed of tissue layers. Three tissue layers. One, no, I'm not mentioning the functions here. I'm just going to mention the names. The outermost is sclera. The inner one is choroid, and the innermost is retina, which is actually composed of light receiving cells. It is actually composed of light receiving cells. So we are supposed to discuss this in a bit detail, this layer. But let's first look about first to have a look on this layer, which I just mentioned. This layer is sclera. Sclera is actually a layer which when it comes out of the you may say eye socket of the skull. Let me open a diagram here. Forgive me if these are if these are some sort of haunting diagram. Actually, I was supposed to open some. Okay, let's open this diagram. It is more convenient to watch this one. Okay, this is the eye socket actually. This one, this one is the eye socket. So the eye socket is actually a particular socket through which our eyes can, in which our eyes get the support. Number one important point: our eyes get the support of the skeleton, and it is adjusted in the skull like this. In this way, it is adjusted, and above and below there are muscles. Above and below there are muscles. So you can see that actually this outer layer that adjusts the eye in the socket is sclera, and there are muscles attached to it. Muscles and some and fats attached to it. So sclera is actually responsible for placing the eye inside this socket of the skull or skeleton, you may say. Then after that, this sclera bulges out in the front of the skull. It bulges out in the front of the skull like this, and this particular portion is known as cornea. This particular portion is known as cornea. As long as it is inside the skull, it would be called as a sclera. But while it's outside the skull and it is in the front of the skull, outside the skull, it would be called as a cornea. And this actually is the outer side of the eye. You can say it is white of the eye. It is actually the white of the eye that is made by this layer, cornea, white of the eye. So once we have seen the white of the eye, then let's come to the some other points, some other labelings of the eye here. Mm, okay, this sclera has some very important muscles. Let me draw the muscles with another color. Let's say this one. It has some very important muscles here. First of all, okay, fine. Very important muscles are here, and these muscles are actually called as iris muscles. Iris muscles. Let me magnify this iris a bit. We will come to know it in a bit detail, which is also mentioned in your book. The iris muscles are of two types. One are circular muscles, and the other one are longitudinal muscles. If I'm not wrong, sorry. Circular muscles, radial, yes. These are radial muscles. What is the function? Let me uh, finish this, then I will be telling you. Suppose uh, this is the arrangement of the muscle. These are circular muscles. And then when these muscles finish, then some other muscles are there, which are outside this whole radius, and these are known as radial muscles. Let me draw it with some other color like this. There are muscles that are in this shape. Okay, can you tell me what is the function of the muscles?
To contract and relax.
Okay, you are already there, so it would be much easier for me. Okay, now the space which I have left between these circles is known as the pupil. This is pupil. The pupil is the point of entry of light. Before that, the light only touches the cornea. Suppose that this is an object and this is emitting the light, and while this is emitting the light, the light is falling upon the cornea, and there are many light rays that are reaching the cornea. And after the cornea, the one that actually receives the light is the pupil. Now, the size of the pupil matters too much. For example, when you are in a broad daylight, let me make some things very simple, then I will be coming back to the point. It must not let too much light, too much light enter inside the eye. Okay, number one. Number two, it must be wide opened once there is no or very dim light. It must be wide open. So it means that it can be contracted and relaxed. It can be expanded and it can be relaxed. Or you may say it can be expanded or it can be contracted. Let me draw the size of the pupil. Like, for example, we can open the pupil to this shape and we can contract the pupil to this shape. This is expanded form and obviously this is contracted form. When would we need this? We would need when, for example, when would we need to contract the pupil? When we are in a very broad, we when we are in the light of a broad day, when we are under the sun, when we are in a party and there are intense light coming to our eyes, when we are driving and someone comes from the opposite side with a high beam light, and that light falls upon our pupil, and immediately our muscles contract the pupil so that we must not receive a large quantity or large intensity of the light that can damage our eyes. So the pupil can contract and expand. Suppose you are in a very dark room, you are no, 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 not this is not the first example. Let's have a first example. You wake up in the morning and your mother comes to you and she tries to wake you up for school, and you are not in the mood to go to school, and you are still laying on the bed, even your mother is calling you. Not your case actually, but general case. Okay, you are laying on your bed, and suddenly your mother turns the light on, and your eyes, like, suddenly you contract your eyes. Oh my God. And then you put the hand on your eyes. Why? Because while you were asleep, your pupil was wide opened because it was dark. You were when you went to bed last night. When you went to bed, you turned off all the lights. Now your pupil is ready to receive as much light as possible. So it expanded a lot. So you suddenly what happened? You someone turned the light on and you were like, oh my God, like this. You put your hand in front of your eyes and after some time it becomes normal. It is normal. Why? because at that time when you were in the when you were in the dark, the pupil was wide open. But suddenly, when someone turned the light on, your pupil was receiving too much light, so it suddenly started contracting. It suddenly started contracting to decrease the light rays reaching inside your eyes and reaching the retina. It's immediately reduced, so it does not damage your retina. This is the technique behind the you may say contraction and expansion of the pupil. So what muscles? So I mentioned here that there are two types of muscles. One is radial. These are radial ones, and the inner ones are circular ones. So whenever we need to expand, the radial ones come to the scene. The radial ones enter the scene. Okay, how would radial ones expand the eye? Let me give you an example of a muscle. This is, suppose this is a muscle and you want to contract it. When you contract this muscle, what would happen? It would contract it to this size, which means it has contracted from the both sides. It has contracted from the both sides. And suppose there is something attached to it on this side. It would suddenly be pulled back. It would suddenly be pulled to back to this point. Why? Because muscle has contracted. Muscle has contracted, and the one that was attaching at this point on the muscle, it would be suddenly pulled back to some other point. Similarly, when these radial muscles contract, they pull back, and when they pull back, they would immediately open this whole you may say it would immediately, the radial muscles would immediately open the pupil. Once they are pulled back to this point, they would make it wide open. So that is how, once the radial muscles are contracted, they would pull all the structure of the eye to the outer side. Once it is pulled to the outer side, so the radius of the pupil would expand. The radius of the pupil would expand. For example, you have uh, an elastic in your hands, and you have an elastic tape, and you bind you may say you bind that elastic tape from the corners, and now it is forming a circle. That elastic tape is forming a circle. You put your hands like this, one end on your in your this hand and one end on your this hand, and you start pulling it away. What would happen? Its diameter would start
Increase.
increasing, right? So this same would happen when the radial muscles would pull all this area to the outer side. So the diameter of the pupil would increase, and now you can receive as much light as you want. Now coming to the circular muscles. When the circular muscles contract, they are all, for example, this is a circular muscle. When it contracts, it suddenly reduces to this size. Suddenly reduces to this size. And the outer ones would also be coming closer to their. For example, there is a one muscle outer to the inner circular muscle. One is this, and the second one is this one. Both, after contraction, both would be too much contracted. They would narrow the size of the pupil by contracting to the inside. These would contract to inside. Once these would contract to inside, these would reduce the size of the pupil, and the pupil would not receive the intense light. So that is how these iris muscles work. The area between these iris muscles is known as pupil. So the light would not reach to dangerous level. So it must the light would be focused on the retina. That is I have not yet mentioned the retina here, but light would be reaching to the retina, but it should be decided by the pupil that how much light should be passing through. Is it too much light? Is it should it be the should the light crossing the pupil when it is wide open, or should the light crossing the pupil when it is very narrow, when its size is too less or narrow? It would be decided by the pupil. So the size of the pupil would be controlled by these iris muscles, the circular and radial muscles. Did you understand this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Coming to the another point about this layer is a chamber here, the liquid chamber. A liquid chamber is here, and this chamber is known as aqueous chamber. Aqueous chamber. This aqueous chamber is actually containing a fluid known as aqueous humor. It is containing a fluid known as aqueous humor. What is the logic of this uh, liquid here? You know very well. There are two types of physics, the rules of physics about the light. One is reflection, and other one is refraction. What is refraction?
Refraction is basically the bending of light when it transfers from one medium to the other, like from air to glass or air to water.
Air to glass, air to water. Whenever it enters from the lighter medium to the heavier medium, it would bend its path. This same rule applies to this aqueous humor, this liquid that is present in this chamber just behind the layer of the cornea. This would same rule would apply. Why? Because after entering into the aqueous humor, the light would immediately bend the path, and the it would immediately focus to the iris and to the lens, which I have not drawn yet, but it would immediately focus to the light and to the lens and pupil. So this is actually creating a heavier medium. You can say this is creating a heavier medium. The heavier medium would cause the light to bend towards the pupil so that you may not lose much of the light that is reaching your eye. You may not lose. Otherwise, your vision would be a bit, you may say, uh, your vision would not be proper if the light is not bended towards the lens. Because in that case, if this is not the heavy medium and the light is not bending towards the lens, you would not be able to see the object clearly. It would be difficult to see the object. This is the reason. Because if the because the heavier medium is present inside the cornea, you can see maximum light intensity, you can see maximum rays through your lens, and your vision is quite better compared to if you do not have this heavier medium. If you're in your eyes, you would not be able to see the object that much clear. So this is why there is a heavier medium inside the cornea. So coming to the next layer, next layer is this is the next layer, and the next layer is called as sclera. Sorry, choroid. First layer is sclera, second layer is choroid. This is choroid, and the choroid has some very important type of muscles here, which are known as ciliary muscles. Now this is the second layer has been started. Okay, do not mix it with the muscles of the iris. These are some of the ciliary muscles that are present in the second layer, and these through from these ciliary muscles there are some very particular structure that originate. Sorry, I have to draw it very carefully. Very important and very. I'm going to label these structure, but let me draw these completely. These these type of structures are known as. Let me zoom it out. Suspensory ligaments. Suspensory ligaments. Now coming to a very technical point here. Very technical point here. Ligaments do not move, do not contract or relax. But we can control them if the muscles are attached to it. Contract or relax, but can be moved if attached to a muscle. Keep this in mind. There is no site in our body where a movement occurs and there is no muscle. It is never possible. If some side of your body is moving, some point of your body is moving, there must be some muscle attached to it. So ligaments do not contract or relax, these cannot move, but can be moved if attached to the muscles. So these ligaments, you can easily see that these suspensory ligaments are attached to these ciliary muscles. Now, what is the function? What is the function? This is a very, 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 very critical point. The lens is a suspended structure that is being held or that is being suspended by these suspensory ligaments. That is being suspended by these suspensory ligaments. And we can change the structure of the lens according to our need. For example, you can suppose what I'm going to say. If I move the ciliary muscle, I can stretch the muscle, and if I do not move these ciliary muscle, I can you may say relax the I'm sorry, I have mentioned the muscle. Forgive me. I'm going to change my sentence. If I move the muscle, ciliary muscle, I can stretch the lens. And if I relax the muscles, I would be relaxing or I would be reshaping the lens accordingly. For example, if I move these suspensory ligaments to upward, then what would happen? The curvature of the lens would go short, would go narrower like this. Let me redraw it. It would be like this. And if I move these suspensory ligaments back to their original point, it would be like this. So it means that the shape of the lens is interconvertible. The shape of the lens can be changed. The shape of the lens can be changed. So it is a very important point that we can change the shape of the lens. How it occurs and how do we actually do this? This is an important point. For that purpose, let me find a diagram which I saved for some lessons. Okay, this is the one. Not this one. It was not this one. Um, oh my god. I have lost this that diagram. Okay, I'm trying. I'm going to try drawing it on my own. Suppose that this is a this is a ciliary muscle. Let me draw it. This is a ciliary muscle of one side, and this is the ciliary muscle. No, not like this. Wrong. Okay, unlike this. Okay, let me be very specific. This is very technical to learn. These muscles and ligaments work in opposite manner. The ligaments and muscles work in opposite manner. How? I'm going to tell this. Muscles work in opposite manner. When the muscle relaxes, muscle, if it is relaxed, or you may, I can draw this table like this, muscle and ligament. If the muscle is contracted, the ligament would be uh, would not be stretched, and the lens would be relaxed. Relaxed. But when the muscle is relaxed, the ligament would be stretched and the lens would be taut. Let me try to give you an example by unsharing the screen. Just look at you can see me in the big screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Suppose my fingers as ciliary muscles. Okay. And when the ciliary muscles are relaxed, these would be in this shape. So suppose that there are threads which are hanging from my fingers. Threads which are hanging from my fingers. When this muscle relaxes, it comes to this shape. So all the threads would be pulled back. Now suppose it like this. This is one ciliary muscle, this is the opposite ciliary muscle. When the ciliary muscles are relaxed, they go back to this shape. And the threads or ligaments are stretched. Why? Because the muscles has gone to this shape and all the threads that were hanging from my fingers, now these are being pulled back. So once these are pulled back, the muscle would be what? The lens would be stretched. It would be like this. Let me try to draw it like this. Once it is relaxed, what would happen? Relaxed.
Sir, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Very good. You have told me a bit earlier, unlike the last time. Okay, so it would be like this, but once it is relaxed, it would be like this. Focus on this structure. These all were hanging downward. Once it is relaxed, all are being pulled back, and all the ligaments that are attached to these muscles will be pulled back as well. Same would happen to this side. So once the after relaxation, these will be pulled back. They would make the muscle less curved and more stretched. You may say that it would be. curved. When it is not stretched, it would be curved, but when it is stretched like this, it would be less curved, less curvature, less curvature of the lens. So this rule is used in all of the whenever we try to observe some objects, but when it occurs, when does it occur? This type of complex phenomena, when does it occur? Now let me tell you, the lens would always be in this shape. The lens would always be in this shape when you see the objects from far. To cover the maximum light, the lens would be stretched. Your ciliary muscle would contract, would relax. Your ligaments would be pulled back, and your muscle would stretch. Once it is stretched or the curvature is less, what would happen? It would receive as much light as possible. It would receive as much light as possible. So it means that to observe the object from the far, we need to uh, lessen the curvature of our lens and make it narrower. We need to stretch the lens so that we can cover maximum light coming from any far object. So this is what happens when we are observing things from a distance. We are observe, and the vice versa happens when we are observing anything from the from very near, like this. If I am observing something like this, putting it very near to my eyes, and when I would go back and when I would put this pen over here, what would happen? My lens would stretch a bit to observe this. But when I suddenly would bring this object near to my eyes would take 1 to 2 seconds to focus on this particular object. Why? My muscles would immediately contract, and the ligaments would be relaxed. The ligament would be relaxed. These would be more curved, and my lens would be able to observe this object. So let me add a column here. How? This column would be representing about the distance. So, okay, the distance. If the distance is, you may say, near. If you are observing a nearer object, your muscle would contract, ligaments would not stretch, and lens would be relaxed. And when you are observing things from afar, these would be relaxed. So the ligaments would be stretched and the lens would be taut. This situation is known as taut. This table would help you a lot. Have you written this table?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. This table would help you a lot because when I was studying the Cambridge, there were questions that were exactly according to this table. So this would help you a lot. Okay, we have studied about the lens. Lens is in convex shape. Yes, I forgot to label the lens. This is lens, and it would be convex shape, and it would try maximum to focus the light on one particular area. Now, what is that particular area? Let me remove both of these lines. First, let me draw the third layer, and I would be telling you about this. How would we draw the third layer? In the red? Okay, in the red. The third layer and the most important one is the retina. This is retina. Retina is actually where the light is focused, because the retina possesses two type of cells. One is known as rods and the other one is known as cones. These actually function as photoreceptor cells. Photo means light. So photoreceptor, these are actually photoreceptor cells. What is the function of both of these type of cells? The rods are specialized to observe the objects in dim light, and the cones are specialized to differentiate between the colors and watch in bright light. So we would be discussing about the functions, separate functions of rods and cones. But are we supposed to? Yes, they're mentioned here, rods and cones. Okay, optic nerve. Okay, and further forming an image. Bright light. I have done discussed this blind spot. Okay, so the whole layer that I just drew here is containing the rods and cones. Sorry. Okay, this whole layer would be containing the rods and cones, like this. And there is a very particular point where there is maximum rods and cones, which is exactly behind the lens. Exactly behind the lens. Let me zoom it a bit. This point is exactly behind the lens, and this particular point is mentioned as the fovea. Fovea. It is known as the fovea because it has maximum concentration of the rods and cones, and it is actually the focal point of our lens. This is focal point of our lens. So each and every light ray of light, lens try to focus each and every ray of light on the point of fovea. Either it is taut or it is relaxed, whatever. It tends to focus the light on the fovea so that it can be maximum. It can be perceived with maximum, you may say, correctness. And there is another. What I was going to tell you. Yes, there is another chamber, just like the aqueous chamber. There is another chamber. This one. This is known as vitreous chamber. Vitreous chamber, and it also contains a fluid known as vitreous humor, same like aqueous chamber. So it also tends to bend the light. So you can see that to focus the light on this fovea, we have we have many bending sources. Number one, the aqueous humor. Number two, lens. Number three, vitreous humor. All these three types of structures are objected to focus the light on the point of the fovea. So it is very important. And there is another point which is known as blind spot. Blind spot, in at which there is nothing like rods and cones. This actually a point where a very important structure is located, the optic nerve. This is the optic nerve. You can guess that any image that has been made on the fovea would be transported to the brain from this optic nerve. So is there is no rods or cones. So once there are no rods, no cones, then obviously the person would not be able to observe any object if the light is focused on the blind spot. So it is very, 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 you may say, important to focus the point on the fovea. Okay. Nerve sees image producer. We can see all the colors. For example, okay, there is nothing about the rods and cones special. There is nothing special about the rods and cones. Let me tell you one thing actually, which is important, and this is known as compensation. Iris reflex we have studied. This is called compensation, which is mentioned here actually. Either no, focusing near or far objects and respond to changes in light intensity, structure and function of the eye as a receptor. So we are not supposed to study this one, forming an image. But I would tell you about this. It is not, just look at this, focusing on a distant object and focusing on a nearby object, you can see easily. Accommodation. Okay. This process is known as accommodation. This process, which I told you, the changing the structure of the lens is known as accommodation. Actually, I have drawn two type of lenses here. So let me mention it here. This converting of this lens into this lens, this is known as accommodation. Now, let me tell you one amazing thing about the lens. The lens that is suspended in the eye would invert the image that would be received on it. It would invert the image, which means that if you are observing a knife, it would be shown, it would, the image of this knife would be made inverted on this retina. It would be inverted on this retina. Once the light rays from this knife would reach your lens, these would be inverted. So the image that is made on the retina is always inverted. You can say 180 degree. But how can we see the object according to our hands? Because when this message reaches the brain with the help of optic nerve, the brain would again invert this image onto 180 degree. It would again invert. So when it is inverted into this, it would again inverted by the brain, and what actually matters is is the image that has been made on the brain, in the brain. So we again see the object in a right direction according to our body. So this is actually you can see, you can say this is by default setting. This setting is by default. The image is first inverted on the retina. Once it reaches to the brain through the optic nerve, the brain would immediately invert it again, and it would be seen in a proper direction according to our body. So this is actually the setting of our retina and brain. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Okay, it is almost completed. Yes, it is completed. There is an activity here. Uh, Now, uh, cover or close your right eye. Hold this page, or you may say hold the screen about 30 centimeters from your right eye. Okay, 30 centimeter. And look at the black dot below. Now, Without moving the book or turning your head, read the numbers from left to right by moving your left eye slowly towards the right. You should find that when the image of the dot falls on the blind spot, it disappears. But it must be occurred, it must be practiced at the distance of 30 centimeter. If you try doing this with both eyes open, the image of the dot will not disappear. So you can perform this activity.
Yeah, I've done it before.
Okay, okay, okay. So, any question?
No, sir.